Welcome back, another week, another video. This time I'm going to talk about the process of digital cloning. And here is why I want every agent and talent to know about this. Is because when we think about digital cloning as a process, we then realize the key steps and the key decisions that are made along the way, and where it's actually important to pay attention and to intervene in order to protect the talent and understand the project management. It's not just a question about rights, it's also a question about time management and understanding the partners and collaborators you are involved in. Also, in my opinion, it is when we know the digital cloning process that we start understanding the different assets that are created in or through digital cloning and that sit behind what we sometimes call a digital replica, a voice clone, or a digital clone. Because the terminology can sometimes be misleading. It kind of gives the impression that those type of assets, the replicas, the voice clones, are like a single unified object, whilst in fact not really. Not from a practical perspective and not from a legal perspective. So it's not really a single object at all. That's a useful short phrase to signal or signpost an area of work and to kind of put a label on the type of project. So it's a shorthand if you'd like, but it's not helpful when we're thinking about it from a project management perspective, from a risk management perspective, and it's definitely not helpful when we're talking about it from a contractual perspective. And as an agent or as a talent who's doing their own contracting and negotiation, it's really important that you start understanding the mechanics of digital cloning and to grow confidence in talking the language of AI and understanding AI. And I don't think you need to be a lawyer or have a PhD in computer science. Heck, I don't have a PhD in computer science, and I've managed to learn this. And I'm here to share with you the key points and information I think you need to have to do really well in the context of AI contracts and AI deals, whether you are an agent who wants to protect talent in the space or move the agency in towards that business and that share of the market, or whether you are a talent who wants to stay informed or perhaps dip their toe, experiment with this type of work, but want to do it safely and in a way that's not perhaps gonna backfire. The best place to start, I think, in my opinion, is to start here, understanding the digital cloning process. Now, before I get into that, let me introduce myself and I'll explain how I've learned all about this. I'm Dr. Mathilde Pavis. I'm a legal advisor and the founder of Replica. Replica is the place I've built in order to dump everything I've learned in the past 10 years about AI, digital replica, contracts, IP, and everything that makes a safe digital cloning deal. I've learned all of this by working with other law firms and talents and agents and technology developers like 11 Labs about the back end of those deals, how the technology works, how we make lawful, safe contracts in this space, the many shapes they can take. And that's good news because that means you can really tailor it to your practice, your portfolio of work, the profile of your clients and talent. That's really good news. But that also means that you need to find your map or your way through this new world of AI and digital replica and digital talent work, really. So we want to start simple, we want to start actionable and practical. Let's start at the beginning with digital cloning, and I'm going to walk you through the 4 steps that most digital cloning takes as a process or stages. I'm going to use throughout this example voice cloning because that is by far where the most business is being done and the most queries and the most contracts, and it's also by far where the technology really works and outperforms a lot of other forms of digital replica or digital cloning work, like cloning of the body or cloning of the face. Those works absolutely exist, and what I'm going to talk you through about voice also applies to those other types of cloning and those other assets. But it's just helpful for me, for simplicity and for clarity, to give consistent examples of one type of cloning instead of jumping and all over the place with different case studies and different examples. We can get into that. Actually, we get into that every week through Replica hours. We go through all types of cloning and examples and case studies and deals and contracts you can make. So if you want to dive deeper, join us every other Tuesday for Replica hours, and you can find more information on that on our website at www.workwithreplique.com. The link will be below the video, wherever you find it, or you can find us on LinkedIn at Replique or through my name, Dr. Mathilde Pavis, and you'll find everything you need to know to join those sessions. They're free and they're very open, safe spaces to come and ask really specific questions or just listen in if you want to join the community without necessarily being like completely out there and raising your hands. Everybody's welcome. So, digital cloning in the context of voice cloning, to give illustrations. Where does it start? Well, it starts with picking the tool. So the first decision that is usually made, number one, is selecting a tool, a digital cloning tool, in our case, a voice cloning tool. And here you have 2 to 3 options. You can either go to a pre-made off-the-shelf tool, which is usually made available through a platform on a subscription basis. So you pay every month to access the technology, and you make an account and you access it through there. And all of the assets will then be funneled through that platform, including the output that will be generated. That's option 1 for the tool selection step. Number 2 is that sometimes the better resourced organizations will have created their own in-house tool. That's the case for large producers like Disney, but that's also the case for IBM and other tech providers or Warner Brothers. They have experimented with their own IT departments because they could, because they were interested in, because they saw the competitive advantage or the safety element it could give them. They've developed their own tool. So that's an in-house bespoke tool created by their own team. And then the option in between is, of course, for someone to invest in their own tool but have subcontracted it out to a third-party provider. Usually the difference between the last two doesn't really matter from your perspective as an agent or as a talent. What you need to know is, are you using an off-the-shelf tool through a platform? If so, which one is it? If you're not, are you using an in-house tool, and are you involving other subcontractors? You need to know, so your list of partners and collaborators in the process of creating a clone is clear to you, because those people will be hosting your voice data or the voice data of your talent and the voice model eventually, possibly. So it's important that you have the list of names and companies. If you work in this space a lot, you will quickly realize that there aren't that many providers in this space. Or I should say, there are many providers, but the top quality ones are usually about 3 or 4, maybe 1. And if you work in this space, you know which one I'm talking about. I'm going to leave it out because I don't want to make any necessarily publicity or advertising for a particular brand or a particular company. But I'm just flagging that there are not a lot of providers at the professional grade quality of voice cloning. So if you do those deals 1, 2, 3 times, you'll start noticing patterns in the name. But you never know, the market can be disrupted and new entrants on AI are coming on all the time. So watch this space. You will also, when you ask this conversation, you'll start tracking, okay, I'm seeing the same players again and again. So it's a question very much worth asking. So that's step 1, tool to use. Which tool are you going to use? Off the shelf, ready-made, or in-house, built in by your team or a subcontractor? Ask the question about that. The second step is that you will need to collect voice data. By that I mean that you will need to record voice recordings or grab or find or source voice recordings from somewhere that you will collect. At that stage, you often need to format the voice recordings in a way that will speak, and what we call it is interoperate with the tool that you've chosen. So the digital cloning tools are essentially advanced computer software. They only understand machine readable content. So the voice needs to be moved onto a digital format, which happens when you record a voice. And then that voice recording needs to be processed a bit more in order to be interacting with the tool effectively. When you do that, often, not always, but often, you create a new class of asset which creates a vocal template, of the person, which is basically a series of ones and zeros, a computer file that can only be understood by a computer and by the digital cloning tool. But it essentially recreates the voice from the recording to a language that the tool can speak, and understands that this will mean, oh, I need to copy this string of numbers, and that will feed into the tool like that. That creates a template. Sometimes we call them biometric template. Those assets are subject to GDPR protection because they essentially recreate the voice in a computer language. That means that they carry a bit of risk of privacy and data breach or protection if they're not kept safe. This is why I highlight this here, because this is why it should matter to you as the agent. This is why you're asking all of the questions, is to make sure you could trace the path of who you work with, what assets get created, so you keep those assets safe in the interest of your talent and your performer. So it's not just about the recordings, it's whatever derivative artifact or derivative files that is going to be generated by the person processing the voice recording in order to feed it into the voice model. Now, the next step is to train or fine-tune, I should say, the digital cloning tool, the general voice cloning tool, onto the data, vocal data that you've just collected and processed. So that's step 3. Step 1, we got the tool. Step 2, we collected and processed the data and formatted it in a way that could speak with the tool that we've picked. Step 3 is to combine the tool and train it on that particular set of voice data. Why do we do this? It's because the tool is pre-trained to create voices, but it's not pre-trained to create the voices of one specific individual and do it well. So fine-tuning trains the cloning tool that is pre-designed for that task to be able to imitate one individual in particular and do it well and do it consistently without hallucinating, without errors, without falling into a different way of speaking or sounding, right? That's called fine-tuning. We're not training the model from scratch. The model is already trained and knows what it needs to do, but it needs to hear and understand the voice that it's supposed to recreate in order to do it, which makes sense, right? When you do that, what you do is you embed the voice likeness or the vocal likeness of the talent into the fabric of the computer program. Why does that matter? Is because at this stage you create a new asset called the voice model, and sometimes it's called the fine-tuned model. It's a part of the computer software created by the developer that at this stage will enmesh both the IP of the developer and the IP and the personal data of the performer. At this point, you have a tree that has a branch that is the perfect combination of both the performer's contribution and the developer's contribution, right? So it's a derivative asset, but it's also a joint asset. And that's the asset that will be able to deliver and generate on demand, on prompt, new content in the likeness of your talent. That is the most important asset in the chain of digital cloning. It always gets overlooked, and that's like a complete, like, it blows my mind, and that's the thing, the hill I'm going to die on if I need to. Hopefully I won't have to, but it's really important that that asset is mentioned in the contract and is looked after in a contract and managed and understood by all parties involved. It's a real point of vulnerability for the performer, because that's essentially the tool that can generate content in their sound without them being involved at all, right? Especially if they don't have access or control over that fine-tuned model. It is their digital replica self is that. It's a computer program, which sounds kind of confusing, but that fine-tuned model is essential to know, pinpoint, and contract over, right? I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to over-labor the point, but I hope you catch me here. And that was step 3, fine-tuning the model so that you create that voice model uniquely designed and calibrated on the voice talent's vocal likeness. Now, the 4th step is therefore prompting the model. At this stage, you have a voice model that will sound like your performer that you can instruct to generate new content. prompting shows up or can be mechanically operated in different way, can be done differently. So you can insert text prompt, which is the one we're most familiar with because of ChatGPT and those LLM tools that we're now more and more familiar with. So you input text and the text is then read and spat out the other way by the fine-tuned model in the voice of the talent. And you can make corrections and usually you can make reiterations. Sometimes the prompt can be speech. You can speak into the model and then the voice that comes out will be overlaid, will be detecting the speech, will say the same narrative or script, but it will be overlaid with the person's likeness. That usually you do it to get a better, more lively speech output and get better quality. Sometimes you ask a trained actor, another actor, to deliver the line, but the voice of another one will be overlaid. That's sometimes what we call voice skinning or reskinning a voice. A bit of a language borrowed from gaming, but I think that we hear more and more used in this context. And those are the two types of prompt. Sometimes you also need to pre-record speech given by someone and you give it as a prompt and it's reskinned or redelivered in the vocal likeness of the performer you want. Why would you do that, you ask? Well, sometimes the performer whose voice you want is not available. Sometimes that is done when the person has actually passed away, but they want to continue using the voice in new projects or to finish a project, and then you will bring on someone who can impersonate the cadence and the style of speaking, and we will only overlay with the tone of voice and the voice texture. That's happened. There are different variations of that. Sometimes for dubbing, it's done so that the person, a trained actor, can speak in the language, the native language, and then the dubbing will then be overlaid in the vocal likeness of the original performer in the scene, in the film, or in the campaign. Those are various practical variation on those types of prompting. So you now have the 4 steps of digital cloning, of the digital cloning process. And I couldn't help myself. I had to also tell you about the assets that are generated throughout this process. I will make another video on this because I think it helps to separate the two out in order to not have information overload. But because it's really closely connected to why you need to know this is because along the way, different assets are produced that present different opportunities and risk for the talent and also for the other side, for the developer, that you need to be cognizant of that when you come into a deal because the contract will need to reflect that. Because if you go in to do sound recordings to train the fine-tuned model eventually, you will need to make sure the performer is paid for this service, that those recordings are wrapped under a license for that particular use, which will be different to the license that is going to apply to the outputs of the at the end of the digital project, the digital cloning process following the prompting. And I should say, perhaps as a last step that I don't mention, because perhaps to me it kind of follows common sense, but I really shouldn't take anything for granted, is the fact that most of the times outputs, when the model has been prompted and the output has been generated, those outputs need to be post-produced. They need to be edited, synchronized, embedded in new media, and that usually involves more work. It's not often work that involves the performer. It will be work done by the producer, the sound engineers, and other media editors, but that's an important step. So perhaps I should make it a 5-step process, but there really are 4 key steps that should matter to you because those are key steps carrying risks and opportunity decision making for the performer. I hope that helped. I will create a sort of either a checklist or a cheat sheet to retrace those steps so you don't have to frantically take notes again if you're rewatching this video, or to make sure that you have another format or support resource to process this information. As soon as it's ready, I will drop it on my mailing list and I will pop it in the link of this video. So if you watch this video later, you may be in the lucky group of people who will get to have access to the cheat sheet and as well as the video. For those who are catching the video before the cheat sheet is made, be patient, it's coming, stay alert, watch this channel and I'll make sure I let you know when that's all ready for you. In the meantime, ask any questions, feedback, enjoy or join us on any of our resources and live events as you can. We're trying to make available as many free resources as we possibly can to improve the state of digital cloning and industry practices in this space. So feel free to reach out, ask questions, ask for clarification, ask for feedback. Bring them to our Replica office hours every other Tuesday at 1 p.m. BST. We welcome everyone, and any and all questions are received and answered within the time we have together. And also, if you would just want to come in to listen, that's okay. That's where most of us start. So I'll speak very soon, and be in touch.